Welcome back to my channel Conquer the Fear. In this video, we are going to discuss about how Spring Boot 3, the latest version, can be integrated with Swagger 3, that is also called as OpenAPI 3 specifications. So whenever you are developing a Spring Boot application and whenever your company require to do the documentations, then Swagger 3 is the most important. So Swagger 3 is one of the best way to do the documentation, so that it helps the API user to understand what is this API about, what kind of it request it takes in, what is the response, what is the information. All these particular informations are available on the Swagger. That is a very handy tool for the developers to test it whenever they are going to use any of these external APIs. So if you take a look at this particular project, this is one sample project which I have created. This is a Spring Boot project, and if you open this particular pom.xml, you will see that this is one of the latest version 3.5.6. Now on this particular day which I am recording this particular video, this is the latest version over there, and the version I have selected for Java is 21. You can select the latest version like 24 or 25, whatever the latest version it is there. So you need to choose whenever you are doing the project download from the starter.io project. The core dependency. Okay, so whenever you're dealing with open API specification, there is one documentation dependency you have to add it. So the primary integration, whenever you're doing with the spring doc open API, then you add that, you have to add that in the pom.xml. So if you go to this particular pom.xml, see, if you see here, this is what the one which I have added over here. Now if you take a note, this is spring doc, and then the spring doc open API starter web MVC UI, right? So this is going to be the common dependency which you have to add it. Now if you go underneath, you will see the open documentation, the Jakarta and all other things. But if you see, this is the Swagger dependency UI, all this particular information you need to add it. Okay, once you add this, it many times it happens that you need to download this particular from the repository, so you have to call this particular thing. And once you do this, even if you get this particular red mark of the error, right, you can call the reload the project. Then you will be able to see that there is no error, and you will see that it is already been downloaded in your local repository. Okay, so once you have this particular added in your repository in your pom.xml, so I have written couple of controller over here. Okay, and I've written some DTOs, exception handling, user services, global, some configuration, and etc. So we'll discuss all this. But let's say you have added this particular thing, you already had some controller written and you have added this, right? So once you start your application, right, so I will just like to show you that if you open that, once your application is started. Now here my application is started on 999 So if you go to my application dot properties, I've added this over here. That's the reason it is on that particular port. Now whenever you want your application, the Swagger UI to be enabled, right, so there is a URL which you have to take it. So if you see here, this is the URL. Okay, my application is up. Now you will see the Swagger UI is already up. I have added all this particular detail. I will showcase you where I have added this. Now if you see, this is OpenAS 3.1 specification. This is the latest version over that. Then you will see, user management, how many APIs are exposed, what is the method type, what is the input type, and other things. All the details you will find those in that. Okay, so this is for Swagger UI documentation. Now you can actually decide the whether you want the specification in the JSON format or whether you want that in the YML format. You can choose that. So in order to do that, you can actually call this particular API doc. Okay, over there, which is going to be the pre default one. Let's say you want the YML. Okay, so here you can simply say YAML, and then your file will be downloaded over here. If you see here, this is downloaded. So this is for open specification in the YML format. Now you wanted to do some customized path for this particular thing, so you can do that in your application dot properties. So if you go here, I've just marked this as an commented out, but you can actually have your own specific path over there, and then you can define those docs and the Swagger UI path over there. Okay, so this is one of the configuration that you do in the properties or the YML, that is of your choice, but you can do that. Then you have to do the customization API information. Let's say you want to add some metadata information, so you can define those global information about your API, such as what is the title, what is the description, what is the version, how you can do the contact details by creating the configuration class. Now there is a config class which I have written over here. Now you will see under this I have marked this as with the @configuration. Then I have defined @bean. So this is quite important. Okay, you wanted to configure those, and then you want to return some open API object. So this is how you are trying to return that. But the important things are that if you see here, there is a title. Okay, I will show you in the UI where exactly this is. Now you make a note. This is a sample API, this is the version, this is the detailed description, the developer name. You can actually add those. So right, so if you see here in the documentation, I just mentioned, right, this is the same thing, the name over here, right, you have defined the configuration and details over here, the version related things. If you see v1, right, the details of the description over here, right, contact details, this is an, if you see, this is the contact details of that person. Okay, and the developer name over there. Okay, then if you want to do some more detailed documentation, okay, so you want to do some annotation. So let's say springdoc open api is going to automatically generate that particular documentation on your controller, on your model. You have to just be very specific about the open specified three annotations. You just have to add those particular descriptive human readable details over there. So this annotation will typically comes with the annotations package, that is IO Swagger v3 OS annotations. Okay, so there are a couple of annotations I will make you walk through of. Now if you take a look at this and go to the controller. Okay, now the very first thing what I'm trying to tell you all is this @tag. Now this is an, you can actually define it on the controller. Okay, so let's say the class, or you can define it on the annotation. So the moment you do this, right, you add this particular, you will be, and now what is the purpose? It is going to group your related endpoints, and you have to give, it will provide you a high level title, the details description for that particular group in the UI wherever you are opened that. Okay, so you make a note of this tag, that is the annotation. Now if you take a look at this, this is what the details, right? So you see here, this is already given over here, the information and other tag and the details. So it is a CRUD operation, these are all mentioned. Then operation related things you can mention. So there is an annotation called which can define on the annotation, right? So now if you go a little bit down, I have defined the operations over here. Now if you see, I have added the summary, the description. So you will see here the description over here, I have added it over here, and underneath there is a description, right? So you have this detail, so it will give you a detail summary description for that specific API or a method. Then comes the parameter. So what all things the parameter it is going to accept. So whenever you are using at the rate path variable or at the rate request param, so this is going to provide you the description, example, the schema, and etc. So in the at the rate parameter, I have added this particular ID description over here. You see here these things, right? So this you will see here, it is already added over here in the parameter, and you will see this is the same thing is over here. Then we have schema, so you can define it on the model, the fields. So this is going to define some schema level details, like what is the constraints over there. You can do minimum maximum length of that, then the request response data, etc. You can define those, okay, and add those, okay. Then you can define the API response. So at the response, if you see here, this is what I have added over here. Now if you take a look at this API response, it is going to respond the 200, then the user found 400, then the user is not found. So whenever the person is going to use that particular API, uses this particular documentation, it comes to clear notation that this is, yeah, whenever I get this particular thing, 200 as a response, then the user is already created. So that's a valid message. Something, if it is not bad request, something the user is not found, then something is wrong at the request level, or something the parameter has not been passed properly, okay. So that is how you add those details. Then at the last thing I would like to add up is that there is a documentation security for any APIs. If you want that particular to be secured, let's say for JWT or OAuth, you need to configure them with the security schema, so that it is going to appear in your Swagger UI itself. So what will happen, it will allow the user to authenticate before the testing endpoints, okay. So the configuration, what you have to do is that you have to update your OpenAPI configuration. You have to include the schema details, your global security requirements over there. So in that, you have to just return, they add the security item method, and then you can define those particular security schema names. Let's say you want to do the bearer authentication, etc., and in that you can define those. So whenever you go to that particular configuration API, so here you can actually define the let's say in the new, right. So if you go over here, so here you can actually add security item over here. Underneath, you can actually just add the new security requirement, okay. So here you can actually add the list over here, okay. So the list can be, let's say I have added bearer security token over here, okay. So this is how you add this. Then you can add the components, like what all components. So you can add the new components, okay, the new components, and then you can call the add security schemas names over here, okay. So you can define those security schema and all other things, right. So this is how you define those, okay. I hope I was able to explain you how you can enable the Swagger UI in the Spring Boot application, that to Spring Boot 3, the latest version. I have made use of this particular dependencies which are compatible as of now with the today's latest documentation, latest Spring Boot. And then I have explained you what exactly the dependencies you need to add, which version, what are the Swagger UI open specifications, what are the customized things you can do in your configuration, what are the endpoints you need to access, what are the different annotations whenever you want some detailed annotations to be defined on those particular documentation page, endpoints, what are the request response, API responses, okay. So a lot of details we can add it, you can customize it, so that the person who is going to use it will be very very handy to use it, that particular API which you have designed, okay. uh, if this video has given you some value, please thumbs up. Also don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Thank you for watching.